Hello, minions of the dark siding realm. It is I, Kroski von Kronos, here with another entry into the Villain Competency tier list series, and today we're going to be going over the main antagonist from She-Ra and the Princesses of Power, released in 2018. That being Horde Prime, the leader of the Galactic Horde and a religious, autocratic dictator whose goal to purify the universe leads him into conflict with She-Ra and her allies on Etheria, upon the planet of Despondos, or whatever you want to call it. The show has multiple names for these things. I don't know. Just look on the wiki, guys. But anyway, Horde Prime is a pretty unique entry on this tier list, I'd say, because of the fact that I think he combines several different types of the villains we've already gone over prior. For example, Palpatine and Truth, who are the main two that I believe that Horde Prime embodies. Similar to them, he's an intergalactic tyrant ruling over vast swaths of territory. But similar to Palpatine, he has a galactic empire type approach. He has power centralized into the authority of him and him alone. And similar to the Prophet of Truth, he views himself as this almost date is this well, not almost. He views himself as a messiah. He views himself as a god ruling over a universe of inferior beings, and that everyone must bow to him, for everyone is innately flawed, and only through obedience to Horde Prime's rule will a creature be truly pure. So with those qualities acknowledged, we should go over a bit of Horde Prime's background before estimating his competency levels, because it's a bit of an issue for me. It's a bit more complex than some of the entries we've gone over prior, because most of the entries we've gone over prior in the series, guys, there have been some conversations in my videos about like whether or not they deserve their spot before I ultimately put them there. But Horde Prime, his actions throughout the course of the series were leaving me both puzzled and impressed. Like, as a fellow villain, as Overlord, of course, I can respect the fact that he created an intergalactic empire. We don't know exactly the origins or specifications of his empire, how it runs, the political or social or cultural values of the empire beyond total obedience and loyalty to Horde Prime. We can guess, through hints given throughout the show, that Horde Prime was an enemy of the intergalactic civilization called the First Ones, who were also a major focus of She-Ra and the Princesses of Power because of the technology they live behind. And they are also a major plot point because Horde Prime wiped them all out, which is central to his own character because it establishes him as a menacing threat even beyond Hordak, who we're more intimately familiar with throughout the seasons because he's the main antagonist from seasons 1 through 4. But ultimately, we learn that Hordak is merely a servant of Horde Prime and doing his best to bring Horde Prime and the wider galactic horde onto the planet of Despondos so he may wipe out all the resistance and conquer it in the name of, bringing purity and cleanliness to the universe. Horde Prime's ideology is rather vague. We can only assume that the ideology, of course, is completely centered around him, and that every cultural basis and belief is centered around worship of him and every action that he takes. Beyond that, we are not so sure about Horde Prime's specific viewpoints or beliefs on a wide menagerie of issues, but we can guess that Horde Prime was definitely worshipped by at least his clones because of the way that he treats his clones and his clones treat him throughout the course of the series. For some background, Horde Prime has created thousands of clones of himself, and to ensure that he is functionally immortal whenever one body is nearing an age of, expiration, he merely transfers his essence onto another clone, thereby keeping his consciousness alive and added on with a lot of experience and memories and knowledge acquired through the course of the endless millennia where he's constantly transferring his essence into a new body. So, Horde Prime's personality is very gentlemanly on the surface. When we're first introduced to him, he speaks with a very weathered cadence, the very cadence you'd expect from a political figure, a religious figure of his standing. But once you go more into it, or if you, irritate Horde Prime in any way, shape, or form, he quickly loses this auspice of approachability and becomes a snarling, monstrous figure, a tyrant, a cult leader. We see this with Hordak because Hordak, at least in Horde Prime's eyes, has committed a grave sin by thinking that they could possibly be equals. That Hordak has created an inferior version of Horde Prime's own Horde, And Horde Prime views this as such a horrible sacrilege that he completely wipes Hordak's mind, destroys his consciousness, and subsumes it into his own hive mind. At least Horde Prime thinks so. So this definitely points to Horde Prime as someone not willing to tolerate failure. This is not someone who accepts ideas contrary to his own. Through the endless years of codifying himself as this deified figure, he has become removed and detached from the galactic life of practically everything around him. All beings in the universe are merely ants to step on, grist in the mill for his ambition, which is a very respectable trait, especially in an intergalactic overlord type of villain. You know, characters like Palpatine, the Prophet of Truth, other tyrants will go over across this series, have this idea of being superior, the greatest life forms in the cosmos because of everything they've achieved. And you need to have that mindset to keep a rule over such an incomprehensible, vast swath of territory for so long. So Horde Prime, in that vein, is very exceptional because not only does he have these traits, he excels at them in spades. I would say that Horde Prime is definitely unique also in that the ideology he creates, unlike the Covenant from Halo, is not worshiping another race or, the technology they left behind, but rather just himself, which makes things a lot more efficient for him as well. Horde Prime does not have to make lots of conniving, religious justifications for everything. He doesn't have to hide all his beliefs and secrets behind a conspiratorial web. He can openly declare himself and his intentions whenever and however he feels like because he is the emperor of the known universe. Every planet is under his control. And since his brothers are all just his clones that can carry his essence at any given time and are basically just extensions of his will, flawed extensions according to him, he doesn't need to worry about anything like an internal rebellion or a schism against his leadership because, for all intents and purposes, he is the only resident of his empire. You guys have to understand. This is not like Emperor Palpatine, who is ruling over a galaxy of dynamic beings, or the Prophet of Truth, or any other tyrant type of villain, Sauron. I'm just trying to think of some off the top of my head. Arthas, the Lich King from World of Warcraft. Well, technically, he wanted to rule over a necromantic kingdom, but that's beside the point. So I guess not Arthas, but any tyrant type of villain. Sebastiano Di Ravello from Just Cause 3. That's another one that I just thought of off the top of my head. These types of villains, while very impressive on their own, and of course, you know how much I respect these types of villains. They rule over countries, galaxies, territories that have living, breathing people that can form their own thoughts and their own beliefs on what's happening and impose them on the established state narratives that they weave through their control over the media, etc. Horde Prime does not need to do any of that. His empire is focused solely on himself to a point where if he died in any way, shape, or form, it would collapse instantaneously. It's not like Palpatine with Operation Cinder, where if he dies, he has a contingency ordering Imperial admirals to scorched earth everything. No, like functionally, the Galactic Horde cannot exist without Horde Prime because he is the godlike intelligence at the center of it. So I really respect the setup that he's made in creating the Galactic Horde. It must have taken a lot of hard work. It must have taken endless millennia of politics and statecraft and mastery over technology and such. I mean, the sheer amount of work it takes to control one planet, let alone an entire galaxy, let alone an entire universe, which is multiple galaxies, by the way. It's just incomprehensible. It's unfathomable. And so I'd say Horde Prime kind of leers into the realm of an almost eldritch entity. I'm thinking of the Cthulhu mythos from H.P. Lovecraft, an almost unknowable alien intelligence that's not entirely within the comprehensible realm of man. But at the same time, his goals and his ideologies and his personality are very rooted and sentient, knowable life. I mean, his goals ultimately are to purify the universe through religious cleansing, which is a very understandable motivation compared to like most Lovecraftian gods. Of course, this is only by comparison. Of course, to most of us, Horde Prime's goals would still be seen as eldritch and insane, but to like a truly Lovecraftian entity, Horde Prime would probably just be seen as another insect to be stomped on. But that in no way decreases his own threat level. I mean, this guy was the reason for She-Ra's existence in the first place, because She-Ra was born into the Horde, and the local Horde on Etheria was merely a pitiful emanation of the actual Galactic Horde, which was ruling over the universe. And everything Hordak did was just to impress Horde Prime, and everything he did still amounted to absolutely nothing, because to Horde Prime, he is just an abomination that must be purified. So, with that out of the way, his competency levels. I mean, I have gassed up Horde Prime pretty heavily in the past 10 minutes, but he definitely makes a lot of mistakes. His goal is ultimately to purify the universe by conquering it, but upon learning that the heart of Etheria, which is a magical artifact of the Etherian core made by the first ones that contains all of Etheria's stored magical energy, it becomes the primary plot point for the final season of the series. Once he finds out that it exists, and not only does it exist and have great power, but it is also incapable of destroying the entire universe. Horde Prime is completely for this. Horde Prime believes that the universe is inherently flawed, but now is suddenly, instead of thinking that he needs to impose his own order on it, he suddenly thinks that the universe should be destroyed with himself included and his own empire so it can rebuild. Um, which is completely insane. Like, even for villain standards. Maybe it's because I'm a bit of a megalomaniacal person and I want to rule over a kingdom that I can actually enjoy, and I don't have this suicidal ideation to suddenly sacrifice everything off some crazy whim. But even the Prophet of Truth wanted an empire for himself after the Halo Ray was activated. He had the Sanshayim stored on a safe planet. He had the Covenant loyalists gathered together on the Ark. Like, he had a definitive plan for the universe after the arrays were activated in the Flood, and humanity and the Sankhili were all but extinct. Horde Prime had none of that. He does not know how the universe after his own death will look, only that it will exist and that it'll be according to him, pure and perfect. Maybe Horde Prime had fail safes to ensure that he would live on in this new universe, which I'm guessing. It's been a while since I've seen the show, but from what I've gathered through reading various materials and, gathering sources on the internet, that his whole plan was just to completely wipe out everything, and of course everything includes himself. But knowing Horde Prime, this is just a bit of fan theory crafting here, but maybe he had a secret plan, maybe he had a bunker or some kind of failsafe prepared for, like, if any crisis hit his empire and it collapsed, he would be able to rebound. And he had this sort of failsafe prepared for the heart of Etheria after its activation. Of course, I don't know. I'm just spitballing here. Who really knows? That kind of degrades his competency a bit. And what really, in my opinion, degrades his competency, well, I mean, aside from the fact that he was beaten by teenage girls, but, I mean, that happens to a lot of villains. I can't fault him for that specifically, but I can fault him for the fact that he allowed She-Ra to get the better of him in so many preventable ways. He allowed She-Ra to be on board his ship, and he lured her with Catra. Initially, that was a good plan, but then it completely went off the rails because Catra rebelled, like, almost immediately against his control. He assumed that someone with such a strong will as Catra could somehow be controlled. That's not possible. He kept Glimmer around aboard his ship for some reason, Princess Glimmer. I don't understand why he did that, considering she was a hazard to keep aboard. I know that he wanted to glean information from her about Etheria, but he could have easily done that with Catra, who was both was heavily involved with the Horde and understood the Princess Alliance very well by waging a war against them ever since she was a little girl. So honestly, all the intel that Horde Prime really needed could have just been directed as questions to Catra, especially considering the fact that Horde Prime has a vast intergalactic empire. I don't understand why throughout the series we don't see him calling in more reinforcements from his various planets. He just has this occupation, this token occupation force, and that's about it. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, guys, but I never see him, like, openly saying that we need reinforcements or anything, or really reference his empire until a rebellion springs up on it because of the actions of She-Ra. And then he has this moment where he's like, get this under control now! Like, he's clearly losing his shit because he has no idea how to react. But what I would say most detracts from Horde Prime is that his Messiah complex, is genuine, which is good, right? You want your Messiah complex to be seen as genuine if you have one as a villain for everyone except yourself. You cannot get drunk off or drugged off your own supply. You cannot get drunk off your own supply. The moment you start taking your own Kool-Aid, it's over, which is what I think happened to Horde Prime. The Heart of Etheria situation, him just generally being obsessed with the princesses and seeing himself as the one who will bring a prophetic cleansing to the universe. He becomes so addled off his own delusions of grandeur that he fails to recognize the more obvious threats in front of him. He fails to recognize that he already can purify the universe in his vision because of the fact that he has this vast universal empire and he can tweak it and alter it to like fit whatever vision he'd like. But instead, he decides to go all in on this apocalyptic plan because he's completely frothing crazy. Villain competency is, of course, when a villain is close to achieving their goals, right? And Horde Prime's goal was purifying the universe through his control and his actions. And I would say that ironically, despite that being Horde Prime's professed goal, he actually goes against his own goal subconsciously without realizing it because of his obsession over the heart of Etheria. And again, the fact that he might have had fail-safes is merely just me spitballing. Canonically, he does not have any fail-safes. Canonically, he is aware that he will die and he will burn alongside the rest of the universe. So for all we know, that this guy is just a suicidal tyrant with a death wish. So it makes all of his actions a bit woozy throughout the season, especially since I felt that Horde Prime, because when I was watching the season, right, guys, I did not feel as though Horde Prime was doing anything to genuinely engender the allegiance of the people of Etheria. He was just chipping everyone. Which, okay, sure, yeah, he's an evil tyrant. Of course he would do that. He wants everyone under his control. But then how are rebellions on other planets happening? Wouldn't those planets also be chipped, or was Etheria just that special to him that he decided to chip everyone? Which in that case, that indicates to me that if his planet is not special enough for him, he won't go through the effort of chipping everyone there, which means that a chance of rebellion there is more possible, meaning that, his whole empire kind of collapsing in on itself near the end of the series was sort of inevitable from the get-go because eventually people would just be sick of his rule and just start rebelling against it. They would be sick of his theocracy, of his endless propaganda, and be like, you know what, we've had enough of this sterile, loveless realm that Horde Prime has created. We're going to rebel against him. I mean, he is an alien tyrant with a lot of knowledge and eldritch intelligence almost. Um, but he makes plenty of mistakes. He thinks that he severely underestimates his opponents, is what I'm gonna say. A lot of villains, as arrogant and filled with hubris as they are, do not underestimate their opponents. They take them seriously and are a formidable threat because of that. Palpatine, of course, never underestimated his opponents. I feel like I've been using Palpatine as an example a lot for these videos. Sorry, guys. Sauron, let's take him for example. He was always very wary of his opponents, which is the reason he was able to be a menace to Middle Earth for so long. Um, Megatron, at least in some incarnations, obviously not in G1, but Megatron and Transformers Prime, he was such an intimidating villain in that series because of the fact that he never took Optimus or his Autobots at face value. He never thought that they were inferior to him. He genuinely took them as a threat. Like in every single arc, he was always wary. He was wary of Starscream. He was wary of the Autobots. He never underestimated any of them and their resolve, his enemies throughout the series. Which is why he is arguably one of the best iterations of Megatron ever to be put to the well, not the big screen, but the television screen. Compare that to Horde Prime, who believes that because of his messianic, godly nature, he is superior to every other being in the universe, and you have him being taken completely by surprise when She-Ra frees Patra from his grasp, when She-Ra unites the people of the universe into open rebellion against him, and ultimately when She-Ra gets the strength to carve him down when he's merely an eldritch blob of dark energy. Or, when his own lieutenants start rebelling against him, when Hordak goes against him, Horde Prime is completely taken by surprise. He cannot fathom what's going on. He doesn't understand why Hordak would do this. He thought he had him completely brainwashed under his control. He didn't realize that his love for Entrapta would override Horde Prime's programming. Villains that understand the power of positive emotions like love and companionship and friendship and kindred community bonds between one another are the most dangerous. They understand their enemy. They know how to play to their enemy. They know how to maneuver and navigate the emotional currents of their enemy to try and get better into their heads. Horde Prime being completely detached and distant to a point that no other villain on this tier list has been, was creating for himself a mental blind spot that was taken advantage of several times throughout the final season. And even though he almost did succeed in his task, admittedly, of activating the heart of Etheria, which I still believe subconsciously goes against his own goal, because he could have more efficiently done his dream with his own empire that he already ruled omnipotently with an iron fist. Even though he was close to activating the Heart of Etheria, he failed in a rather comedic way, because all his clones, because of the refuse of magical energy, all his clones were broke free from his grasp, and his warship became like this beautiful little piece of tree, this like piece of nature in the atmosphere. That ending was just really, I mean, it just made me laugh. Like at that point, I was just kind of laughing at just how silly this was. Yeah, and then Horde Prime is just coping. Someday I will return, though all is lost. Horde Prime will return, and then Shira's like, "No, you won't," and just completely destroys him. So, I mean, villain competency I draw from the source material, right, guys? And you guys might be annoyed. Well, oh, Horde Prime was written to be that way. Yeah, but I still think that you can write a villain a certain way, and he could still be incompetent based off his own subconscious and conscious failings, which is what Horde Prime is. He's consciously and subconsciously failing himself and his own vision to pursue a very narrow-minded ideal of the universe that will ultimately never be achieved because war will always exist so long as sentient life will exist, and sentient life will always exist, no matter what, as long as there is an organic creature on some world somewhere. Horde Prime was ultimately, I think, doomed to fail in a lot of ways, but the fact that he did achieve Emperor of the Known Universe and was such a massive threat for so long earns him elite echelons of darkness above Bayverse Megatron and Carlton Drake, in my opinion, anyway. With that out of the way, thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for the views on my recent shorts. I've decided to experiment a bit and get into shorts, and you guys have been so supportive with so many views on that, and I will continue releasing shorts, so stay tuned for that. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you want to see more evil, delicious content of darkness and doom and despair. And with that out of the way, this is your Dark Lord Krosky signing off. Peace, Dark Side.